Hello and good morning. Welcome to the first Evosep breakfast seminar here at ASMS, virtual ASMS. I will start by giving an update about all the exciting things that has happened at Evosep since last year. And then Florian will give a talk after me about some of his work with the Evosep and some of the new things that we are also launching this year. But I'll come back to this. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, put it into the chat box, and then we will address these at the end of the session. Okay, so two main things has happened over the last year. The first thing is that we have improved our standard methods, and this has really made a huge difference. So I will give you a rundown. I will show you a lot of very nice data, what the improvements are. And then we have also, with the new software release that was just released, we have improved the flow sensor calibration and also some of the calibration of the internal hardware of the instrument to really increase the reproducibility of the instrument. So first of all, with our new optimized methods, we've also changed our column recommendations for some of the methods. So for the very fast methods, the 200 and 300, we're now recommending a 4 centimeter column, ID 150 with 1.9 micron beads. For the 60 and 100 samples, we're actually going to keep our recommendation at the old column, which is an 8 centimeter ID 100, 3 micron beads. And then for the 30 samples per day method, we have also updated our recommendations to a 15 centimeter column, ID 150, 1.9 micron beads. So the way we are looking at chromatography is basically we are measuring the peak width, both at half height, but also at 4 sigma. 4 sigma is a very nice measure because it takes a little bit more of the tailing and the peak symmetry into account. So as you can see on this slide, we've extracted the peak 722 from BSA, and here you can easily see that the peak shape has significantly improved over all our methods. If we go a little bit further and actually look at some measures of chromatographic performance, the peak width at 4 sigma has overall decreased quite a bit. So we have much sharper peaks now and significantly less tailing. And as you can see, this is mostly pronounced at the 200 and 300 samples per day. Also a bit of gain for the 100 and 60 samples per day. And then again, a significant improvement for the 30 samples per day. A common measure of chromatographic performance is peak capacity. And if we look at peak capacity, here we really kind of take the peak shape, how many peaks we can resolve in the entire elution window. If we take all this into account, which is basically peak capacity, then we see that we get quite a bit of gain, both for the 200 and 300 samples per day, which is all the way up to 70–80%. And then again, for the 30 samples per day, we are seeing almost a double performance in terms of peak capacity. So we are also introducing a performance column. So as I mentioned earlier, we are not recommending a new column for the 60 and 100 samples per day, but we are launching a performance column. So this performance column is an 8 centimeter 150 ID column with 1.5 micron beads. And again, if we look at the normal chromatographic peak measures, we are seeing a significant increase in performance. So the standard column is also working very nicely for these methods. As you can see, we get a very nice peak definition. But the performance column is providing much more narrow peaks. And if we go back to the same measure as we looked at before, then the peak width has decreased significantly. And again, if this is translated into peak capacity, we are seeing a 50 to 60% increase in peak capacity. So a significant performance boost. However, we don't have a lot of experience with this material. So it is a performance column. It is really a column if you want that additional performance and that's required for your application. To look at numbers, we have also tried to look at how much gain we get from the standard column to the performance column. And here you appreciate looking at 550 and 500 nanograms of sample that we see a nice increase throughout the different loads. However, if we look at the performance gain at the really low loads, this is much more significant compared to the high loads. It was a bit of a surprise that we saw this much performance gain, but it's definitely worth noting that if we are going to the more sensitive applications, then this performance column will really boost the performance significantly. So also really what Evosep is all about is high throughput, it's robustness, it's being able to really utilize short gradients. So I just want to discuss how we look at proteome coverage in relation to high throughput or the throughput. And again, if we look at this it takes a little bit longer to actually go through this graph, but what this is that in the bar graph we have the peak capacity or the efficient peak capacity per minute. And as you can see, this is really high for the short gradients. Obviously, as we all know, at least the people who are interested in chromatographic performance, a good way of increasing peak capacity is to run longer gradients and using longer columns. However, we don't have a linear correlation here. And it also takes a lot of time, and it's definitely not kind of going towards more throughput. But if we are able to really efficiently run short gradients, then we can really optimize our efficient peak capacity per minute. And obviously, this is irrelevant if the mass spec is not fast enough to really utilize this efficiency. But as the mass spectrometers are getting faster and more sensitive, we can really start to utilize this this effect. So to go into more detail, we have just released an application note that goes into much more detail. You are able to download this from this webinar, and you can also find it on our webpage. So I'll definitely encourage you all to take a look at this. So built for standardization, I mean, this is really kind of what we wanted to do with Evosep. We wanted to standardize, we want to make kind of whatever performance we could get, make that available to everybody. Despite kind of being an expert or a novice in the field, we wanted this to be, we wanted people to be able to apply the performance regardless. So I think we've really achieved this, and we just recently did this experiment where we looked at run-to-run reproducibility, and this is all done on the 100 samples per day method. And as you can see, from run-to-run, we are seeing an average reproducibility of 0.9 seconds, which is really nice. More importantly, if we start to look at column-to-column reproducibility, we're only seeing a little bit more than 4 seconds on average. So this is really important because obviously if you're running big experiments and you're in the middle of the experiment and have to change the column, then you really need that column to be as reproducible as possible. So on top of this, it will also be really nice if the instruments are reproducible. So that's actually the last picture to the right is instrument-to-instrument reproducibility. And this actually includes the column, and this is only 4.8 seconds on average. So just bear in mind that we are seeing a column-to-column reproducibility of 4 seconds, and that is also kind of included in the instrument-to-instrument reproducibility. So if you have several instruments in your lab or between labs, this is the reproducibility you should expect, and you are able to get with the Evosep One. So very recently we looked at seeing a bit of echo here. I'll try to continue and hope for the best. So this very nice reproducibility is a huge advantage when you're looking at DIA. And this is a data set that we recently acquired with the Evosep and Explorers 480. It's a direct DIA experiment. And you can see the data or the numbers that we're getting from the individual methods. So ranging from 300 samples to 30 samples per day, we're getting some very nice numbers. But more importantly, to the right, you can see that the reproducibility is extremely high within these data sets. So if we look at the reproducibility of, for example, 200 samples per day, then we are getting about 90% or even more than 90% that has a CV less than 20%. So this is really, really nice data, and this is really what we're looking for when we're trying to do these DIA experiments. So one thing is that we're getting really good numbers, but we're also getting really, really high reproducibility. And this is also true in an experiment that we recently did with Bruker. And again, we were getting some really, really nice numbers, identifications using the DIA passive workflow. We've also just published this, or Bruker has just published this application note, and I'll definitely encourage you to take a look. But again, we are seeing some extremely nice reproducibility in these data. So I think this is very important because obviously it doesn't really matter if you're getting some really nice numbers if the reproducibility within the data set is not super high. So extremely nice data. It's really the combination of being able to very reproducible execute and introduce a separate sample, but obviously also these high-end mass spectrometers and these new workflows are really taking full advantage of the chromatography that we are now able to provide in a high throughput fashion. So we have also done a bit of work with Agilent. Obviously, we are very interested and very keen in looking into clinical proteomics. And for many clinical proteomics assays, targeted proteomics seems to be at least one of the more promising ways to go. There are obviously other ways of doing clinical proteomics. Targeted is definitely one of them. And what we did here was we did a dilution curve to see what was the limit of detection, but also the lower limit of quantification. And we did this prior to the injection of about 400 plasma samples, 1 microgram of plasma samples. And then we repeated this dilution curve just to see kind of what would the condition of the instrument be in after this pretty big set of samples. And as we can see from this slide, we were getting completely the same data, the same level of detection, and same level of quantification. So a really, really nice data set that shows that we can really kind of start to look at larger cohorts and get reproducible performance throughout a really large data set. This is something that Ling Feng from Agilent is also going to present. You can look up the poster from the ASMS website and the details you can see here. So the new big launch at Evosep is Evosep Plus. And what we've learned over the last many years is that the Evosep is a really nice, robust platform. And we wanted to use it for standardized proteomics, but we also really learned that it has a lot more potential. And really what we could do is now start to look at a more specialized application and really fine-tune that workflow and make a special method that would fit that application. We have talked about this before. Now we are launching and we have some really nice data to show. So basically, Evosep One will be a continuous growing universe of applications, specialized applications that is tailored for this standardized platform, the Evosep One. So the first specialized method is something that we have heard a lot of requests about. There's a lot of people who have wanted a longer method, and here it is. So we have made an extended method. It's an 88-minute gradient. It is something that is really not kind of in our mindset. We want to focus on throughput. But now we have this long gradient that will allow people to go into more Are we seeing the right slide now?
Yes.
Okay. No. Okay. There's a bit of technical hiccup here. But anyway, I'll continue and hope for the best. So now we have this extended method, a long gradient that will allow you to get some more comprehensive proteomes. It's a nice method. It's in the same family as our standardized methods, but it's just more for people who wants to go into the more detailed or into the depth of the proteome. We've also worked on lipidomics, so we have had a very nice collaboration with the Max Planck Institute, so Matthias Mann and also Catherine, and we've looked at a method to look at lipids using the Evosep. One of the tricky things, one of the really hard things to do in lipidomics is to handle the sample. So lipids are usually solubilized in very volatile solvents, meaning that kind of handling, loading, doing all this sample manipulation is extremely difficult, and also the lifetime of the sample is fairly low. So using the Evosep for this, we are able to very quickly immobilize the lipids on the tip, and once they're immobilized, they are extremely robust, or extremely once they're immobilized on the tip, they are very stable. So completely different to what you would expect from a liquid sample. We're able to now store the lipids on the tip for prolonged periods of time. So in terms of performance, we're actually getting comparable data with a method that's more or less the 60 samples per day method, so kind of same throughput, about 60 samples per day. And we're able to get the same number of lipids compared to a recent study that the same group has done. So really nice in terms of that performance. But the really nice thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that now we are actually able to store the sample for longer periods of time. This is something that is tricky, it's hard, it's something that was completely different to a standard easy nano-LC workflow. We can now store these for up to 30 hours with minor degradation of the sample. I know that Florian is going to talk a little bit more about this, so I'll leave it at this and leave it all the details to Florian. However, I would like to point out that Catherine has a talk, so if you are interested in this, I would highly recommend to take a look at this talk. It's a very nice talk, and it also goes through this workflow. And then we have also worked with Matthias Mann and Andreas Brunner on a single cell method. So one of the things that we realized is that having the setup where we have 4 pumps that's creating the gradient and putting it into storage loop, and then using a single high pressure pump to move the content or the experiment from the loop onto the analytical column, that really means that we can do some very precise and very exact manipulation of the content of the loop at extremely low flow rates. So ideal for real nanoflow applications. So in this case, or in this figure, you can see that we are running very stably at 100 nanoliters per minute. However, we have actually gone a little bit further over the last few weeks, and we are now down and getting some really nice data at much lower flow rates. So I'm not going to spoil this. This is going to be a cliffhanger. It's something that I will definitely talk about in the future. But yeah, super exciting and very promising results still being produced here in Odense. In terms of the performance we've had just a few weeks ago, we are still getting some very nice data. We are getting some pretty good numbers all the way down to 1.5 nanograms of peptides. This is HeLa injected onto the column. However, I think this is something that is still work in progress. It's something that is it's super exciting. I can't reveal too much, but stay tuned for more information on this. Again, I would like to point out that Andreas is also giving a talk on this and some of these exciting data. So you can also find this at the ASMS website. And again, point out that this is a preliminary data. It's something that's work in progress, but it is definitely going to be available sometime soon. So more Evosep at ASMS. I'd also like to really encourage all of you to join our next breakfast seminar next week. This is our vendor seminar. So as I've already pointed out a little bit, is that we have some very nice collaborations with Bruker Thermo and Agilent, and they will present some of this work and some of the data that's been produced with the Evosep One and their high-end mass spectrometers during this breakfast seminar. And then we are also going to do a virtual hospitality suite on Friday. And one thing is for sure is that it's going to be interesting. So I would definitely encourage all of you to come. We have no idea what we're doing, but we will do our very best to make a blast of this. So we are still kind of brainstorming how to make this a great and fun event. So this was my introduction to what's been going on, what has been happening at Evosep over the last year. Now I'll give the word to Florian. Again, if you have any questions, please put them into the comments, and we will address these at the end of the session. So Florian will give a talk called Towards Robust and Rapid Mass Spectrometry-Based Omics, Profiling of Clinical Samples. So I think most of you will know who Florian is, but Florian has been with Matthias Mann, done his PhD, and just recently got a junior professorship at the Friedrich Schiller University at Vienna. And he's also still a guest scientist at the Max Planck Institute. So without further ado, I'll give the word to Florian and try to make a seamless transition.
Yes, hello Nikolai, hello everybody. Nice to be here. I would like this opportunity to talk a little bit about our work that we've been doing now for the last month, a little bit secret, but now it's really time to show what we are doing. I'm really super excited about this project. I hope everybody can see my screen. So as Nikolai already said, this is work that really was spearheaded by Catherine Vasilopoulou in the lab in close collaboration with the Evosep team, and still basically all of the work was done at the Max Planck Institute in Matthias Mann's department. And the goal of this work was really to go beyond what we've seen so far and achieve a true multi-omics profiling with high robustness and high speed of clinical samples. So if you followed the work in Matthias' lab for the last years or so, for sure you came across this overall topic here. So for a big topic in the lab was really how can we use plasma proteomics to profile human health and disease? So in other words, do we find protein signatures in the plasma proteome that's going to tell us some factors, or maybe guide our decisions about treatments, or do we see patterns of different lifestyles? And the goal in the lab was really to arrive at a high throughput platform that would allow us to screen many individuals to arrive at something what we would call the plasma knowledge base. Proteomics was not a new idea, but what we really thought, and now with the new technologies where we have so much throughput and really great involvement of the technology behind, we thought that we would now be at the level where we could do rectangular strategies. And this is to differentiate from triangular strategies where one would start from a discovery project and then narrow down to single biomarkers. So instead, Philip Geyer and Matthias came up with this idea of the rectangular strategy, where one would do a discovery phase with a large cohort, but then also do the validation phase with an equally large cohort. So in the end, one would screen hundreds to thousands of patients or some individuals in order to find biomarkers or other for diseases, lifestyle, or any other treatments. And really, it was this mindset which then I think was also behind it's really difficult and challenging to do this with conventional nano-LC. I guess everybody who's ever done some nano-LC work is well aware of the fact that these tiny little things really tend to break apart, and there's always some issues. There's always some leaks. It's hard to find them. It takes time to troubleshoot. So clearly, this is something that we could not really imagine in the clinical setting. So luckily, the Evosep team had this beautiful idea of the Evosep One, which features the preformed gradients and also stores the samples on the tip. And then from the tip, the samples will elute, which overall reduces the overhead time and allows us to run high throughput proteomics. And I guess you're very well familiar with this principle. And since this paper and product came, and I just wanted to highlight two studies which are also presented here at ASMS. So one of them is a beautiful work from Andre Michaelis in Matthias's lab, who is interested in interaction partners of yeast proteins. And he was not just interested in interaction partners of a single protein, but he was interested in all interactions in the entire genome or proteome. So Andre came up with the idea to screen 4,000 GFP tagged genes on a single or with our LCMS workflow. So you can have a look at his poster to see all the details. I think that the take-home message here is that with this platform that you see here, that we were able to run over 8,000 injections from all of these genes at the speed of 60 samples per day without any major breakthroughs. Breakdowns, not breakthroughs. Hopefully there's going to be some breakthroughs. Then the other exciting story that's going to be presented by Lily Neo from Matthias's group in Copenhagen, where we really took this idea of clinical proteomics into practice. And Lily was spearheading a project focused on liver diseases, and she had access to a clinical cohort of more than 500 individual patients, and she did a paired screening of liver proteomics and plasma proteomics using the Evosep One coupled to an Orbitrap mass analyzer. And if you want to hear more about this, you're more than welcome to join Lily's talk, where she's gonna tell you all the basics to workflow, but also some really exciting outcomes of this study. Yes, lipids and other highly hydrophobic compounds. So for the rest of the talk, my only purpose is to convince you that lipids are not unwanted compounds, but that one which should actually look at them, especially when we're interested in clinical samples. There's a very high interest to clinical tests, and it's probably the prototypic clinical biomarker, and that is cholesterol. I guess everybody has had his cholesterol levels tested, but there's also other lipids that are routinely tested in clinical practice. So in fact, lipids are not unwanted, but they are really important for human health and disease. And this motivated us to not only, but Catherine Vasilopoulou in the lab set up a very decent workflow that would allow us to pair the plasma proteomics work now with plasma lipidomics work. So for this, we would start from a more or less generic liquid extraction that we could apply to either plasma samples, but also to tissue samples or cell line samples. And one of the key design features that we had in mind is that we wanted to have a workflow that is sensitive enough so that we would not need large amounts of biological samples. And this was mainly because we now focused and pushed so much the proteomics pipeline that we could deal with 1 microliters of plasma samples or less, that it would now feel a bit strange to analyze 100 microliters of plasma just for the plasma lipidome. So we wanted to have this on par, and we decided to go for the TIMS platform that we developed together with Bruker in order to achieve a high sensitivity lipidomics workflow. So for this, we used the nanoflow liquid chromatography with a rather fast gradient of 30 minutes, analyzed in negative and positive electrospray ionization mode. And we used the trapped ion mobility spectrometry technology coupled with a positive acquisition mode that we developed together over the years. So just a brief reminder of the key things here. We're using trapped ion mobility to not only separate our ions based on mass to charge and retention time, but now also based on their shape, which is measured with this trapped ion mobility analyzer. And then this passive technology helps us to overcome one of the biggest challenges in mass spectrometry, that one can actually not get faster scanning speeds without losing ions. Passive gets around this by making use of the temporal separation of the precursors in the TIMS to jump with the mass selecting quadrupole from one precursor to the other one as they elute from the TIMS device. So if we look at this in this two-dimensional heat map, we would program the instrument in a way that the quadrupole jumps from these ions here to these and these. And what we end up with is high sensitivity MS2 spectra of now multiple precursors in a single TIM scans. All of these MS spectra and very well-defined features in this newly four-dimensional space that is made up from mass to charge, cross-section, or ion mobility and retention time and intensity, we can use software tools to identify the lipid content in our sample. And we did describe this workflow in much detail in this publication. I'm just going to show a few highlights here from this study that I'm personally very, as you could have told already, I'm really excited about the passive technology. What it does, so here you would see a conventional TIMS MS experiment where we would select this red precursor here in the center for MS quantification, for MS fragmentation. Can do from the very same scan, can select 16 precursors instead of 1. And all of this without losing any sensitivity. So what we end up in lipidomics, but also proteomics practice, is now that having instead of just 1 precursor, we get well over 10 or an average 15 to 16 precursors in a single scan. So in other words, we are speeding up our MS acquisition rate by a factor of over 10. So this is nice to have this number, but in contrast to proteomics, where we basically have an unlimited number of precursors, this is actually different in lipidomics, where the samples are not that complex, and one generally detects many less features or precursors. So when we then compare the depth with which we can cover all of these precursors in a single LCMS run between this conventional TIMS MS workflow and the TIMS passive workflow, which is the panel on the bottom right here, you can appreciate that with the passive technology, we really get to a point where we can generate MS spectra for almost any of the detectable features in a single MS run. I think this is really a big step forward in lipidomics technology, and it allows us to have a deep dive into the lipidome, even in short gradients. Mobility separation itself. And similar picture here. So for proteomics and peptides, it's almost a bit boring because they more or less follow the same trend. But for lipids, they're really exciting because they're so diverse in their chemical structure. They really fall into different spaces here in this three-dimensional space here. So for instance, the triacyl glycerides here in blue, they have a very different ion mobility as the diacyl glycerides or some other lipid groups. So now combining all of these, we now define all the precursors that we acquire in our experiments with high precision and accurate mass. We have the retention time, we have the ion mobility with very high precision, and on top of this, we have MS information for almost any of the precursors or any of the features that we can detect in a single LCMS run. So that's why I'm really excited about this workflow. And of course, something that we are doing a bit different probably than the rest of the lipidomics field, or with a very few exceptions, is that we from the beginning started with our nanoflow LC. And the reason for this was, as I explained before, is that we were really interested in pushing the limits of the sensitivity and being able to get a deep lipidome also from very little sample amounts, much less than 1 microliter of blood plasma, for instance. However, with this, we more or less arrived at the same situation that we've been been in proteomics some time ago, that we're really excited about the sensitivity that nano-LC would deliver. And it really allowed us also to prepare the samples in multi-well formats, because we now needed just very little volumes. So one could easily scale up to 96 or even more samples. And also nano-LC is probably quite economic, because we just need so little solvent. However, the big downsides here again is that we're again struggling with the robustness of the system, and especially because we were going for these short gradients of 30 minutes. Actually, the overhead time between injections was actually becoming a significant factor. And what also Nikolai alluded to before is that what we observed in our hands is that when we would leave the sample in the autosampler for more than 2 hours, for instance, here shown for 7.5 hours or even half a day, we would start losing identifications. So this could be due to precipitation of the lipids, or due to oxidation, or something else happening in the autosampler at 7 degrees in these highly organic solvents that we have to use to keep them in solution. So this was really then the point when we were reaching out, came up with this idea of combining the advantages of the Evosep system with lipidomics. To increase the throughput and the robustness while having less overhead time in between injections. So really very much the same story that we've heard before for proteomics. And what was really important for us is that we also maintain the sensitivity that we've achieved with our nanoflow LC system. So having much higher sensitivity than conventional high flow systems. And then we were really excited about this possibility to store the samples on this solid phase disk rather than having them in the liquid phase. So really hoping that this increases the stability of the sample and also makes it easier to handle the lipid extracts when they're conveniently stored on the tips. Say that at this point I can again pinpoint to Catherine's talk in one of the sessions, where she's gonna tell you much more about the specific details and how we solved all of the problems that came across. So it sounded like and just to give this some numbers, so where we have been kind of with our nanoflow LC workflow was at around 34 injections per day with this 30-minute gradient and the overhead time of about 12 minutes. And we were running at a flow rate of around 400 nanoliters per minute. And the sample stability was okay, but there was certainly room for improvement. Our goals for the Evosep system was now to get to the throughput of 60 samples per day, running at 1 microliters per minute, reducing the overhead time and benefiting from the stability of the lipids on the solid phase. Like a straightforward idea in the beginning, and we're really excited about, but then reality also hit us quite hard. And it was actually a hard way to go from a proteomics system to a lipidomics system. And this is really just a summary of the hard work over several months. But we had to optimize the sample loading conditions on the actual Evo tips. And then in lipidomics, you're using buffers that you would probably otherwise only use to clean your mass specs, for instance, isopropanol. So it was quite a tough task to purge the entire system to these new buffers. And then also the gradient that we used on the nano LC was not linear. So it was also a challenge to the Evosep team to kind of convert this gradient into something that we can use with the pre-stored gradient in the Evosep system. However, after a lot of hard work that really paid off, we are now at a point where we can really use this system for lipidomics, and this is really some of the very first exciting data from this system, just showing a few extracted ion chromatograms from lipids of a human plasma sample. And you can see that the different lipid classes kind of fall into different ranges of the retention time. but all of them form nicely in sharp peaks. And we were really happy to see the chromatographic performance here in these samples. Then one of the key points for us was really the question, okay, now we have the chromatography fixed, we're able to run this, but do we really see this benefit of storing the lipids on the solid phase disk? And for this, Catherine did a very simple experiment, just loading the samples, human plasma samples on the tip, and then injecting them on the Evosep system after 0 hours all the way until after more than 1 day. And as you can appreciate from these early results, is that throughout the entire time, we do not see any decrease in the number of identified lipids, suggesting that lipids are really stable on this system. And also when we look at this more quantitative, we found that the coefficients of variation were below 20% on median, and also for lipids that are kind of vulnerable to oxidation, we still found very good coefficients of variation below 30%, just comparing the intensities in kind of a label-free fashion. So I think this is very encouraging and very promising first. And as Nikolai already said before, we also achieve numbers of identified lipids that are very close to the numbers that we published before on the nano-LC system, indicating that overall we really achieved our goal of maintaining the sensitivity of nano-LC, but benefiting from the increased robustness of storing the lipids on the disk. Conclude the talk, and I hope I could convince you that lipids are not unwanted, and that there are certain attractions of combining the Evosep with lipidomics, which is the high sample throughput, the increased robustness of the entire LC system, the simplified sample handling on solid phase disks, and all of this while maintaining the sensitivity of nanoflow LC. Our vision for this in the future is that this will enable us to run parallel proteomics and lipidomics profiling of clinical samples. And before, you probably would have needed to go to 2 different labs, but our goal really is to be able to run these 2 main omics on one LCMS setup. This effort, first of all, my mentor Matthias Mann, but also Catherine Maslopoulou for doing all the hard work, and the Evosep team, Nikolai and Ole, for really supporting us and giving us technical guidance to push this project further, and all the other people involved in here. And thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Florian, for a very nice talk. And I think it's really exciting. It's very different to where we come from, all the proteomics world. But I do see that lipidomics is a growing field. And maybe I should start out with a question and really ask, where do you see lipidomics going? Do you think this is going to take off and be kind of a big part of human diagnostics in the future? Or what is the potential in lipidomics, do you think?
I really hope so, and I definitely agree with you that lipidomics is kind of a evolving and emerging field these days. So there's really more and more papers coming out. The community is kind of reshaping a bit, and I really think it could become an important pillar of molecular diagnostics. I mean, there's certainly many interesting lipids floating around, and I highlighted cholesterol, which is already probably one of the biomarker in the field, and it's already highly used. So, and we're actually using this already, like we're using the clinical tests to correlate them with the proteomics data. So I think it's and there's so many more lipids to find. So yeah, I definitely hope that this is going to be a big part of the future.
A big part of the future, and definitely, I mean, we are seeing that multi-omics is really kind of taking shape. And lipidomics, proteomics, kind of all these different omics are definitely going to be kind of the future of diagnostics. Yeah, exciting things. So I'm going to just reach out and get some of the questions from the chat box. So the first question is for me, and it's a question whether or not you can use your old columns for the new methods. And yes, indeed, you can. So our new and optimized methods, they work really, really well, also with the old columns. But if you want to get the best performance, then obviously the new recommendations are highly advised. I would actually like to point out that it is super important to either use our columns. It is a very easy to use setup. We do have the right adapters for all the main mass spectrometers, especially thermal, Bruker, and Agilent. So it is easy to use. It's easy to set up. It's almost guaranteed, or well, we do actually guarantee that you will be able to reproduce the performance that we are showing. Yeah. Another question from the chat box is how do I get access to these new methods? And these new methods are actually already available. So if you are an Evosep user already, then you will be able to get them in the most recent plugin, the most recent software version, which is accessible from our support zone. So I would advise to go in and get them and try them out. They're really good. Then I have a question about the 30 samples per day method and whether or not we are going to optimize the start of elution. So I think right now the peptides are starting to elute at around 7 minutes for the 30 samples per day method, and that's where it should be. Again, I would highly advise to use our column recommendations. We have seen customers using other columns, and especially longer columns, and this is not really what you should do. And if you do that, you will definitely start to see a lot later elution. So again, if you don't want to use our columns, then at least stay to our recommended dimensions, and then you should be able to get the exact same performance. Okay, so I think this is a question for you, Florian. So we have a question. Could you please explain how to discriminate between metabolomics and lipidomics, and is there an overlap?
Yeah, excellent question. that's really good. Well, I guess there is no strict border, and there is definitely some overlap. You could probably just draw a border somewhere at the hydrophobicity of these things. So whenever it's soluble in highly organic solvents, you would probably refer to this analysis as lipidomics analysis. Whereas more of the more hydrophilic metabolites, you would probably rather like put them in the metabolomics version. So it's really, I guess the main difference is kind of the extraction method that we use to get the analytes from the sample.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Then I may have the last question here, and that's for me. Can you upgrade from Evosep One to Evosep Plus by a software upgrade? And actually, you just need to upgrade again to our latest version of the software. And once you have this, then the Evosep Plus and the Evosep Plus methods are automatically embedded. You just need to go and activate them. And to do this, you just have to go and find the application note. In this case, for example, the extended method. And then you will be able to add this. And in short, it's very easy. You just go to the start menu. There'll be an Evosep Plus menu. And from here, you can launch the installer and install the Evosep Plus methods. And as this list grows, obviously you have more choice, but this is how it works. And all these methods are obviously free for all Evosep One users. It's an added feature to the instrument. So excellent question. So I think that was it. I have no more questions in my chat box. If you do have a question, you need to be really, really quick. I would like to first of all thank Florian for a very nice talk, and it's really nice that you contributed to our breakfast seminar. I'd like to thank all of you for attending. and I hope to see you at some of our other events. Just a quick reminder, we have our breakfast seminar next week, and then we also have our hospitality suite on Friday. We do have a lot of fun and also very nice scientific activities planned. I'm sure it's going to be fun, interesting, and interesting. So make sure to check it out, and all the best. So once again, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your attention. Bye-bye.